Everyone knows that being healthy is a good thing, but a simple look at the world around us shows that most people have no idea how to achieve it. The fact is, human beings are much more than physical beings, and until we learn to create an actionable plan that accounts for physical, psychological, and spiritual health, we won't make much progress. Today, Colin Skinner joins us to discuss his journey with overcoming an autoimmune disorder and his low energy lifestyle as a consequence, how genetics affect your health, how to live a high energy life that excites you, when biohacking can become detrimental, why most diets don't work, what energy really is, and how to harness it, and how it affects your life, and much more. So as I said earlier, the first thing that I really want to get into is your story with hyperthyroidism, which for the audience basically means you had, what was it called, Hashimoto's, right? Where you're just not producing enough thyroid, you have really low energy levels. I did a little bit of background digging, and it sounds like if it's not fixed, it can actually be life-threatening and have some really detrimental effects. So for people that aren't familiar, or people that maybe do have a serious like medical condition and can relate, can you kind of give us some background on what that felt like and what your experience of life was while you were living with that?
Absolutely. I'd love to. And it was a really challenging time. Wasn't sure what the heck was going on with me, but for me, it looked like super low energy. I
Hmm.
think that the most um, frustrating for me was like the brain fog. I literally had like short-term memory loss, which was, I think, the most concerning part for me being in my mid 20s.
Mm.
Just out of college in East Tennessee, living in Knoxville, and in my first job. So coming home from work, being just depleted, and then like not having any real, I just felt like I was directionless. And it's really interesting because I started to dive deeper into Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism. If you
Hmm.
look at some of the energetic aspects and some of the literature and what's called like German New Medicine, or some of these more psychological um, backgrounds and
Hmm.
what's going on physically with us, the common denominator with people with hypothyroidism is that they feel like they're behind in life. And that
Mm.
can look different for a lot of people, but typically speaking, and I talk to my clients about this today, do you feel behind in life compared to others, compared to your own plan,
Hmm.
compared to maybe the plan your parents had for you? Like, do you feel like you're behind in life? Because if you think about it on a more like energy level and with your adrenal glands, if you feel behind all the time, you're going to literally have this sort of low level subconscious knowing
Hmm.
pretty much 24/7 that I should be here, I should be way ahead, but I'm way back here. I'm in a sense I'm stuck. And so that stuckness is truly what you get physically when you have hypothyroidism. You're just stuck in this low energy state. It feels like
Mm.
you'll never get out of it, especially if you're alone, if you don't know what's happening to you. So I say all that to say that's how I felt. I felt
Hmm.
stuck. I think 10 years ago there was a lot less conversation around these things. And so, and for your listeners too, Hashimoto's is technically different than hypothyroidism. Usually they say if you have Hashimoto's, you become hypothyroidism. Like there's some symptoms, but they
Mm.
are technically different in nature. You don't have to be hypothyroidism yet if you have Hashimoto's, but one leads to the other. And a whole
Gotcha.
nother conversation on, is it your body actually attacking you like
Hmm.
autoimmunity, or is that not really what's happening? There's starting to become two camps on what's actually happening, but I digress with that. It was an
Hmm.
interesting time of life and have learned a lot since that
Yeah.
diagnosis.
Yeah, no kidding. So with autoimmune disorders, my understanding of those is they're basically genetic, and so a lot of people think that you can't really do much about them. Um, is that true? And why didn't you?
Mm. So let's get into that. So we now know, and this is Googleable. This is not
Crazy
something.
conspiracy theory or something? Yeah.
Exactly. This is Googleable if you really want to be Dr. Google here. But there is a budding emerging field called epigenetics. And epigenetics in
Hmm.
simple terms just means we know. that based off of our day-to-day decisions and our lifestyle inputs, and the common example here is cigarette smoking, which I even have a different take on versus I think a couple years ago. But
Hmm.
just in theory, if you start smoking cigarettes and you are predisposed, so that's where genetics comes in, depending on the genes you were given, if you have more of an inclination to form some sort of whether it's a cancer or whether it's a again one of those like physical manifestation, if you will, of what you're doing. So smoking cigarettes every day,
Hmm.
then genetics can play a role. And epigenetics says you can turn on or off certain genes that could say spell out trouble, or the opposite that could be good. So if you have genes to be an Olympic athlete one day, you've got the short twitch muscle fiber genes.
Hmm.
Well, hopefully you are training, and hopefully you're in an environment that will allow you to form those fast twitch muscles and maybe become a faster runner. So again, epigenetics just means you can turn on or off certain genes and certain predispositions.
Mm.
So it's kind of a yes and no answer to that, right? Like because you see family members have, like, I'll talk to people and they all have some sort of thyroid issue, and so it makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
Why? Because they have a lot of common denominators in their genes. But the interesting part is, and you can case study this, if you have two twins that one went down this path, one went down this path,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you can see height differences, you can see body composition differences, skin differences, just based off of how they show up in life, their thoughts,
Hmm.
their actions day to day, and again just how they treat their body, the habits they have,
Hmm.
how much they get outside. So that part really, kind of, lack of better terms, kind of turns me on or fires me up to learn more about, okay, then what
Hmm.
lifestyle inputs make me predisposed for good things, for vitality markers and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So, and that's true with, to kind of land the plane, that's true with hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, all those things. Again, the thyroid's very delicate, so it's very easy to get a little off in this region right here where the thyroid's located. But if we're doing the right things, we don't fall into those traps.
Hmm.
We're certainly not going to live out this tale we've been told of, oh, you're just, you come from this family, you're just going to have thyroid problems the rest of your life. Like,
Hmm.
that is such a hopeless stance. And that's not the way God made us. Like, we have so much, we have free will, and we're able to live a life of vitality and strength, and moving into things that make us really tick as human beings.
Hmm.
And you don't have to just have this diagnosis spoken over you, and that's just who you are the rest of your life. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So you said a lot of very interesting things there. Um, One of the things that I read about it in one of your posts where you're actually talking about your background with hypothyroidism. Well, actually, before I get into that, um,
Mhm.
just to make sure I understand what you're saying is basically any sort of genetic um, priming just gives you a more or less beneficial starting point, but it's what you actually do in terms of inputs that will determine whether or not those get amplified and actually become problems, or if you can like build on them. And you're saying it's both good and bad. So you can have beneficial genetics that you lean into, and you can have detrimental ones that will harm you if you go down certain routes, right?
You nailed it. That's it.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. Yeah. So then what I was going to say is one of the things that you mentioned was, obviously your doctors wanted to just drug you up and kind of help you cope with it. Um, and this mentality around um like coping with existence, I think, is one of the most destructive things in society,
Mhm.
because oftentimes what we end up doing is we optimize for length of life instead of quality of life. And this is something that I wanted to get into um, later on in the episode here, but this just seems like a good time. So um, I have no interest in spending the last decade of my life on a hospital bed. And so I'm sure you've seen like there are a few really high profile entrepreneurs and people that are super into biohacking. They're like, yeah, I'm going to live to like 120, 140, 150. But
Mhm.
then they're doing so much in the here and now that they're missing the experience of actually existing for the sake of something that they may or may not actually get to. Like you could actually the way science is going, let's just say hypothetically, you can get like the right blood transfusions and organ transplants, and you get the right gene therapy and all this stuff, and you can make it to 200. You could still get hit by a bus any day. So it's
Yep.
like, um, what I want to get to with this is how you optimize for the experience of actually living, like when the work is going to be beneficial to you and when it's okay um to not put as much emphasis on that. And there are a lot of very important distinctions here, obviously, because a lot of, well, most of the time, I think when people say, oh, you just need to live a little, that's just an excuse for living, in a way that's self-destructive.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Mm. It's it's such an important topic because I think the more I am, um, the deeper I get into this health world,
Hmm.
the more I realize that this pursuit of health is it's almost, I hate to use this word, but superficial and, like you said, fleeting.
Hmm.
And the more and more my wife and I have been talking about this recently, it's like, what do we want to impress upon our boys the most as we model for them what a healthy lifestyle looks like,
Hmm.
and feeling our best and being able to serve others and give to others because we are quote unquote on fire for life, feeling good in our bodies and able to give. And this is where I started to learn about just this idea of vitality. Was talking to a buddy about this the other day. It's like almost like health is the vehicle. Almost think our bodies maybe, and vitality is the gas, and you need the gas to go somewhere.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
of course, you could run with that metaphor and probably parse that apart. But just in simple terms, this endless pursuit of health, um, it's like to your detriment. I feel like at
Hmm.
some point it's so neurotic, and I work so hard with my clients on this thing you may be familiar with, cortisol and cortisol
Hmm.
levels. It's very in vogue these days, the conversation,
Stress
because
hormone, basically, right?
correct,
Yeah.
yeah, stress hormone. And it's, think of all the terms in science and health and stuff. It's like, I wish cortisol wasn't known, but it is, because we literally live in such a modern day and age where cortisol is one of the number one, biggest issues in
Hmm.
conversations today. So everyone knows what it is now, unfortunately. But we live in such a fight or flight zone as a
Hmm.
society in this post-industrial, you say colonized, whatever society. We're going so fast that cortisol is such an issue.
Hmm.
And so when we try to be our best, when we biohack our best, when we're shooting for perfection, we are literally raising our cortisol levels. It is an adrenaline response in our adrenal glands. It feels good, actually. There is a psychological effect and response to adrenaline and cortisol.
Hmm.
So literally having the conversation with a buddy about how you're going to biohack your way into, this outcome, it's a feel good uh, effect and response in your
Hmm.
body. There's no secret why people literally, as they start to learn about health and biohacking, it literally, chemically speaking, feels good.
Hmm.
Um, but again, there are downstream effects, a cascading effect, literally hormonally, to that. And the more we are on overdrive with the adrenaline, excuse me, with adrenaline in our adrenal glands, the less, I'll just say, less sticky it is, and the
Hmm.
less effect our normal cycles actually have on us, because we're just up, up, up. And then that's why, as we see,
Mm.
everyone starts becoming down, down, down. They get stuck in these cycles.
It's almost like an addiction where you need a bigger hit every time to keep
Exactly.
that feeling going. Interesting.
Exactly. It's, we all have receptors and we all know that feeling. You don't have to get, sciencey about it. It's
Hmm.
just things affect us the first time the most, right? And the more we use them, the less they've affect. And then, and any addict could probably tell you this, you have it to have a prolonged period without this stimulus. And then maybe you come back to it and then it works again, like whatever that drug is.
Hmm.
But cortisol, biohacking, all these things are drugs in a sense. And yes, there's a place for cortisol. There's a place for
Hmm.
biohacking in a sense, but this is why I talk to my kids, my wife so much, getting back to vitality versus health, with returning to nature and returning to God's ways and God, you
Hmm.
can even say God's laws, the way he set things up, because as we return to that, there's no need for
Hmm.
biohacking. And yes, we live in the modern day society and age where it's more difficult to do that. And I understand,
Certainly, yeah.
right? People live in the suburbs with a car. None of that's natural. I mean, and I say natural as in you just go back a few generations and you're starting to see these things come on with everyone has a car, everyone has a, a house right next to a neighbor. You're not, I don't know, milking your cow in the morning,
Hmm.
or it would have been so normal, you know,
Yeah,
in whatever
everyone still
society.
had horses in World War II. Like people forget that.
Exactly. We're really not that far removed. It's kind of wild when you think
Hmm.
of how quickly things have changed, especially, gosh, even in our generation with
Oh
phones,
yeah.
you know? So
Hmm.
I'm going off on tangents here, but to your point, it's so well said, and it's such a great question because there's this simplicity and this like more of a lifestyle and rest, in the being and the doing of just returning to nature and
Hmm.
vitality versus this endless pursuit of health and biomarkers. And I'm going to
Hmm.
live to 180. Like, cool. Good for you. Like, what are you leaving for your lineage? Like, what are you
Hmm.
doing for society? Maybe you feel like you're showing them how to do the same thing.
Hmm.
Maybe it's purpose. I don't know. Um, but there is such a simplicity to just returning to nature and, like you said, living your best life, like in the moment to moment. Because again, I believe that's when we're able to give to others
Hmm.
and give our strength away and serve humanity.
Yeah. So when you're saying health and vitality, it sounds like health is physical, and then vitality is more a fullness of the soul that kind of it gives life to that health in the first place, instead of just being a machine that you need to put the right inputs into and all that. Is that right?
I would say yes, and I don't
Okay.
think many people are having this conversation. So I think it's
Hmm.
even like wrestling with it is helpful. Like trying to
Yeah.
understand this for people listening. Like just sit with this for a second and really ask yourself, what do you think is the difference between like health and vitality? And we can get more into
Hmm.
vitality if you want, but this concept of, people call it life force, or gusto, or that inner fire. There's a lot of ways to put it. I think men especially like to talk about these things, and I think it's a very important
Hmm.
conversation as we've kind of left like tribe and inner circle, and we now are online. We can still have these conversations we would have had by the fire and passing stories and down. But yes, vitality versus health, and how they coincide. There's obviously a relationship there. It's not one or the other.
Hmm.
um it's very important though. It's very important to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And it's really interesting when you were talking about the relationship of cortisol and adrenaline and how that feels good, because um, right after COVID happened and all that, I went deep down the rabbit hole with biohacking and everything. And so
Sure.
it was like 2021, 2022 maybe. I started to get um paranoid isn't the right word, but it's probably the closest thing that I have, of just trying to very meticulously control every aspect of my life, right? So it's like, you can't
Yep.
drink tap water because there's fluoride, and you can't carry your phone in your pocket because EMF radiation,
Yep.
and uh, microplastics in all the food, and all these different things. And it felt good because it felt like I was doing something important and I was protecting my health. Um,
Yes.
but then after, first off, living that in long enough impeded my ability to just spend time with like friends and family or whatever. Because I'd go to, I don't know, a birthday party or Thanksgiving, and I'm like, yeah, there are seed oils in most of this food. I'm not eating it. And they're like, what? Like, dude, your grandma made this. So shut up and eat the mashed
Yeah.
potatoes. Like, it's just one of those things. And then as time went on, I realized, okay, even if I try to, meticulously control my environment as much as possible, it's not like I have the resources to go just live off on my own island somewhere. I'm still constantly being impacted by Wi-Fi. Pretty much everything you eat that's like meat or cheese or dairy product has been in contact with plastics at some point. So
Yeah.
you're going to eat microplastics. It's kind of unavoidable.
Right.
Um, and so I wouldn't say I've mellowed out by most people's standards because I do still try to, eat really clean and, um, get outside and walk in the grass and all that stuff and do some of the uh, crunchy granola, like woo-woo stuff that I think
Hmm.
most people try to avoid. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that is a much more functional alternative because you're not trying to control your life so much that again you're missing out on the experience of it. Um, but for you,
Right.
like what would you say is that right? I don't know if I would even call it a balance because I don't think there's really any compromising with, hormone warfare. But
Yeah.
yeah, how do you approach that so that you're able to have that health and have that vitality and um not not become super manic or like psychotic about meticulously controlling every aspect of life.
Right. This one, I'll give my wife complete credit to and
Mm,
for, because before her, this was a hot, tough topic in my life. And I was just like you said, I started learning, and it's like, oh, all this knowledge is coming in.
hmm
Start to feel kind of like powerful with it and like, oh, I'm on another level. But like you said, what comes creeping in are these like, I'm gonna make the wrong decision, or well, now I know what to do. I can't go back. And you feel stuck in like modern
hmm
day situations when your grandma makes this awesome pie and it's like, I can't eat that anymore. I'm a changed man,
hmm
and then it's like that's that to me, that deathbed. I don't think you'd be thinking about this on your deathbed, but those types of decisions
hmm
I feel like could maybe come creeping in one day of I cannot believe I told my grandmother no because of the dang seed oils. You know what I'm
hmm
saying? Like looking back, I don't want to be that one day looking back and because obviously my grandmother's not going to be around forever too, right? And
Yeah.
so that hit me hard, and then my wife helped me realize that God gave us intuition.
hmm
And so the more we are able to, and this is where the body and the mind and the heart kind of all intersect.
hmm
And this is where too we have to slow down and be still. Even in like a situation where you're like answering somebody, this can happen in an instant. But if people are able to cultivate their intuition second by second, and by that I mean asking yourself, is this an intuitive yes or an intuitive no?
hmm
That can be getting ice cream out with just waffle cones and you just haven't had that in a while, but you're with maybe some friends or family or whatever, and you ask yourself in that moment, because there's a couple nuances to this. There's
hmm
peer pressure. You don't want to be a yes man and just like later regret it, type of thing. Not that you should beat yourself up, but you also, like you were saying, you want to be this like stringent machine, and
hmm
it's like, no, I can't, I don't do that anymore. Many ways to look at it, different situations, but in every situation, you can ask yourself, again, this is a gut thing. Is it an intuitive yes or an intuitive no? And
hmm
that's flex. And that's something that you can like hear more loudly every time. That was my number one like big aha moment in those
mm
situations that I had to grow in for sure. And we even had that as parents. Like if we're out and there's these really nice people, it could even be family members, and they've got food in their house that we don't ever bring into ours, but they're offering our kids, a sucker, or and I know like there is nothing at all real or normal or natural about what they're giving them.
Yeah.
Like, do I step in as like that, parent and like, no, and slap it out of their hands? Or am like, how can I show up in those moments? So that's even another level to me as being a parent, right? So it's one thing to make my own
hmm
decisions. Now I'm making decisions amidst my family and friends for my child who definitely wants that sucker or whatever it is.
hmm
So that's a whole nother conversation probably, but that intuition was the missing piece for me. And I truly, I mean, think about it. Like there is no more beating yourself up. There's no more regret
hmm
when you give yourself an honest chance to just respond. And it's foolproof. Like it really is. And you learn to hear it more and more, that cultivation of intuition.
hmm
Um, but that's what we do nowadays, and that's the quote unquote balance. and it looks different different days. That's kind of the fun part too. I'll surprise myself. I mean, I know it sounds kind of silly, but yeah, and it's kind of fun that way. I don't know. It's just, again, I think it's like God speaking through us almost, of just like, I know it's best for you. You know it's best for you, really. But in different scenarios, I think it just creates a different answer,
Hmm.
maybe. It's just you gotta try it on. You gotta feel it out. And there's no regret. You don't beat yourself up over it.
Hmm.
And then hopefully that can be like that compass throughout life.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I am really glad that you brought up your kids because I did want to get into that too.
Yeah.
Um, with like how you and your wife are trying to instill these good habits in them, and what you do when they do ask for junk food. My mom was one of those, especially when I was younger. I now have six siblings, so she's much more lenient with what she allows in the house. But when I was little, it was low fat, everything, and fruits and vegetables and all that. And I always
Yeah.
loved going to this friend of mine's house because he had all the good snacks. He had the goldfish, he had like those prepackaged cupcakes and all this stuff. Which of course when you're a kid, you don't know any better. It's just, oh, it tastes good. I want to go eat this. So how do you approach that?
Wow, that takes me back. You mentioning that, I can see my friends' houses that I would just be
Yep.
like, it's like,
Oh
of
yeah.
course, over. Um, and your mom also, props to her. Sounds like I
Hmm.
mean, easy for me to say, but stellar job at now being a parent. I know
Hmm.
there's discipline that goes into it. There's, decision making, and sometimes it's just so much easier just to say yes to everything and just, I don't even care. Like
Hmm.
you almost get to the spot I do some days where I'm like, they're gonna be fine. Like the body is the body. It's relentless. It's regenerative, but it's the neurons that get turned on, the chemical processes that happen. Again, these downstream effects from
Hmm.
these little decisions, like one piece of whatever. So again, not being neurotic at all. We live in our family in a place of of freedom, of inclusion. We don't restrict. And what we learned, this was a really cool finding out in Maui with the kids out there. There's so much good ripe fruit around that,
Mm.
yes, is very nutritious, but as you know, is high in natural sugar.
Hmm.
We are all about natural sugar, but it tastes so good. And the more and more you eat it, if you're not balancing it, say with protein in that meal, even just like a simple beef stick or just some sort of snack or
Hmm.
eggs, whatever, especially for kids, it hits the brain pretty quick, and there's a high, and then there's just a crash.
Yep.
And we see this at birthday parties happen all the time where the parents get all these beautiful pineapple spreads and this lush, I mean, literally local farmed orchard fruit. And the
That's
kids,
amazing.
dude, it was, talk about a great spread at a party. I mean, it was just wonderful. And so you could tell the different parenting styles going on. But for us, we had some neighbors that really impacted us well with this, of like, they did a good job of allowing their child to make their own decision. However, the parent they would always say first, "Hey, just so you know, you've had a lot of pineapple already." I'll just use this as an example.
Hmm.
Um, if you continue to eat pineapple, that's fine. We recommend that you'd have some protein, like eat this beef stick. And typically the child would say no, or like, I just want the pineapple. I say, okay. That's your decision. Just know that if you continue, like, you may get a stomach ache, and it's a lot of natural sugar, and you might kind of, not sure how that you would say this. Your energy levels might go down pretty quick. You may need a nap, and we won't be able to play with our friends here at the party. Like, just know that,
Hmm.
that they would let the child. And again, this is not a life or death thing. This is just more of a biological effect. And then, sure enough, the kids would eat more pineapple. They'd all crash, get temperamental or whatever. Not their faults. It's just a biological thing, right? And
Hmm.
so that was a big lesson learned for me as a parent. And so we were already kind of doing things that way, but that was a good, like, real life example, and especially in community and in tribes. So we do the same thing, man, where we let our kids intuitively eat, but our biggest thing is we don't bring in, I'll just go ahead and say it, the crap. We don't bring the
Hmm.
crap into the house that the FDA approves, that are absolutely just so far removed from the natural order of things.
You're talking like the Lucky Charms are healthier than steak type stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Those studies, and of course my kids aren't aware of that, but I'm very aware, and I'm like,
Yep.
there, and we see it at the store, man. Even at Whole Foods, places like that, the marketing, over by even by like the register, it
Hmm.
is all designed and geared to be right there at face level with your child, bright colors, and again, even at Whole Foods, all the candy is all like right there, and they want to grab this stuff. And so those are times I think where it is our job. Discipline is huge, and we do inform and teach and like tell them like, and like, you don't want this is just not for your benefit. Trust me. But we do also, as much as we can, allow them to make their own decisions and feel for themselves what they experience. And
Hmm.
of course, more times than not, they learn from that experience and they don't do it again on their own. Versus mom and dad barking at them, no, 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 and they go ahead and do it anyway, almost out of rebellion, or they're not coming to that realization themselves.
Hmm.
So we do try to teach them or even treat them like they're adults or older, of course. But
Hmm.
the thing is interesting. And again, bottom line, we just don't bring that stuff into our house.
Yeah.
It's just rare if ever.
Yeah, no, that's so important, just setting up the right environment. And you're absolutely right about the grocery stores. I did 75 hard. I'm still like going through the program. I'm in one of the break phases right now.
Love it.
But, set the 75-day diet, and it was pretty simple because I mean, I have a very, very fast metabolism by nature. So my diet was basically like I'm not eating desserts and I'm just avoiding as much processed food as possible, right? So just eating a lot of whole stuff, cheese, eggs, meat, fruit, all the rest of that.
Yeah.
But I remember there was one day specifically I walked in the grocery store, and obviously, the way things are positioned, the milk and the eggs and all that is always in the back, so you got to walk to it. And I remember I walked in and I was just like, this is insane. The amount of color and attempts there are to just grab your attention and suck you in. And I mean, I'm not going to say I'm perfect. Like I do still have donuts and stuff from time to time.
Yeah.
Um, but it's really funny that after you spend enough time away from that, you almost lose your taste for it. Like
Mhm.
they've done things where they go to these tribes in Africa that still live nomadic or very
Yeah.
tribal lives, and they hunt and everything. And they've brought them, like licorice and these very unnatural candies that we haven't given it to them. And their only comment is like, tastes kind of like honey because that's their only frame of reference. And they
Yep.
don't really like them because it doesn't sit with you well. And I had an experience recently. I ate something that I used to really like. Forget what it was exactly, but you get that initial dopamine rush, and then it hits your stomach, and you're like, "Oh, I've made a mistake."
Yeah.
And
Right.
it's so interesting for you to kind of allow that consequence to speak for itself.
Mhm.
And the reason specifically I wanted to ask about your kids was because um, I was looking for like any tips or anything that the listeners can use. So like if they're in a moment of weakness where they feel like, oh, I do really want to, eat this thing or whatever, um, what would be that like how would you speak to a child and convince them not to do it? And what you're saying is just let them bear the consequences of their actions. And as long as it's not super saturated to the point where that's the only thing that they're consuming, so it's like you almost develop that um, dependency on it, like you were talking about. Eventually, you go, okay, like this is not going to be the best thing for me.
Exactly. And it's obviously moment to moment, situation to situation or whatever, but it's the same principle of I've heard a lot of parents do this, ones that I look up to, of literally allowing, like, if their child, a teenager wants to
Hmm.
try alcohol or something, and they're like, it's I think for one instance it was like tequila or something, and the dad knew. He was like, "You're not gonna like this." He allowed his son to drink it. He had too much, and the
Yep.
kid never touched alcohol again based off of his own experiential moment with it,
Hmm.
or from start to finish. And that,
Yeah,
to
that's a
me,
rough start.
is a rough start, right? Good night. And it's, to me, there's so much love in that. From
Uh-huh.
the, I truly believe that, instead of do as I say, not as I do type of approach, which I feel
Hmm.
like most heard, the opposite to me is yeah, it's allowing the experience to happen and to know that they're gonna get out of that what they need.
Hmm.
like truly. And they're not going to do it, typically speaking, they're probably not going to do it again because it's out of their best interest, and they know that. They've literally experienced that. So
Yeah.
you said it well too, but that's been our approach so far, and thus far it's gone pretty well. Of course, there's times where it's just
Oh yeah.
difficult,
Yeah,
but
naturally.
you know, we're learning just as much as they are as parents. So
Awesome. And do you personally smoke or drink or indulge in anything like that?
I don't. I don't. I stopped. I drank alcohol periodically, and when it became almost, I wouldn't have admitted this at the time, but looking back, it was like a crutch. It was definitely a
Mm,
band back when I was experiencing hypothyroidism, and
hmm.
I because of the alcohol, I felt like it was allowing me to feel like more of myself. Like when I would
Mm,
indulge after work, just a couple with a friend, and that became more repeated. And so again, for me, it was like this escape
hmm.
from my symptoms to this relax, which that's a lot of people. It really is, if they're being
Hmm.
honest. But again, I don't also at the same time, I don't demon the same thing with how I treat my kids. Like I don't demonize it. And I think that if, there's a place for it. I'm curious to hear your response to that question. But um yeah, no, and it's funny you asked about the smokes. My wife has a friend who literally, this is so cool to me. She grows herbs in her garden like lavender, rosemary, all these like things you'd use in the kitchen, right? And there's studies behind this that certain ones that if you wrap them and just like there's like what the indigenous like Native Americans would have done, or many cultures honestly, but you wrap them
Hmm.
in like a natural paper that's not like just a bunch of plastic.
Hmm.
You can literally smoke it, I guess is a word to use. It's kind of looks like a cigarette. There's a nervous system response to these things. It's the same thing as
Interesting.
like smelling them. And so you're not getting high, you're not getting a buzz or anything, but there is a nervous system
It's almost
response. And she,
like an incense or something.
I guess, yeah, but you like
Hmm.
smoke it. You don't smell it, or it's not like an
Oh,
aroma.
interesting. So you're not just, it's not like in the background burning, like you're actually
No,
ingesting it.
it's like
That
it's
is
a
so
jar.
interesting. Okay.
It's a pack of cigarette, looks like cigarettes, but all she makes them at home.
Hmm.
And there's different based on the herbs, and I don't have as a good of an understanding as like my wife, and she does, but she grows them. She'll roll them, and so I don't even, and I've enjoyed those before with my wife. It's a one is called the nervous system reset. There's a couple other ones. I'm actually shocked that no one has run with that and like create a business or
Hmm.
put those in the stores or
Yeah,
something.
I'm editing this out of the podcast. No one else gets to do this. This is going to be my thing.
That's right. It's very anyone could do it. It's a very simple concept. Just
Yeah.
grow in your garden. But anyways, I've enjoyed that. But that's the extent. That's
If
the extent.
if it doesn't get you high, let's be real, that's probably why.
Yeah.
If you don't get the buzz, that's probably why.
Yeah,
Nobody wants to do that. It's the
exactly.
essential oils of weed.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, but that's it, man. I used to love,
Interesting. Yeah.
it was it was absolutely wrecking my liver, and
Hmm.
this is just me. This is just my experience with it. And my microbiome was all thrown off, and they were just the yeast infection
Hmm.
overgrowth I had was just flourishing on alcohol. My yeast loved beer. So I had switched to ciders. That was not working well. So
Hmm.
I'm curious your stance on,
Yeah.
alcohol, cigarettes and
Yeah.
stuff. Everyone comes in differently with it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think first it just kind of fits into what we were talking earlier about living a little versus letting yourself become a completely just um destructive and
Yeah.
degenerate person and just using that as an excuse. Oh, I'm just letting loose every night. Like that's maybe a bit much. Yeah, so with things like just the everyday food we eat, I think the question is a little bit easier because you can find better alternatives for it.
Yeah.
On the subject of smoking, I've only ever smoked tobacco, right? So I've, never done any sort of drugs or anything. So I mean, I personally don't believe that that's like, morally proper. Um,
Hmm.
but even if I did, I don't think it would really interest me. So I've never touched the stuff.
Sure.
Never touched
Yep.
cigarettes. I've only ever done cigars and pipes. And I mean, it's it's all right. It's something I'll do socially. Like if everyone else has a
Yeah.
cigar or something, I'll grab one. And I have heard you do get some like I forget what it's called. Something that impacts your testosterone, I think supposedly you get from it. Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, yeah, I don't really have a huge problem with that. I think, cigarettes are one thing, and like you're saying with the hyper processed paper that introduces, its own issues. With food in general, you can typically get healthier alternatives. And a lot of the quote unquote healthy stuff that you buy tastes terrible because it's still trying to be a candy bar when it's like, just admit that this is not a candy bar. Um,
Right.
Alcohol, I think, is the most interesting one because it's been around for thousands of years, but the modern iteration is very different from what it used to be because now it's like, especially like modern beers and stuff are just awful for you,
Yep.
like you were saying. Personally, I don't really have a taste for much aside from red wine and whiskey. Red wine I usually only eat with or drink with, some type of meat, so like steak or salmon or something like that. And the whiskey is what I drink with my friends when we're sitting down.
Totally.
But I think it is also very important for people to be aware of the detrimental effects of alcohol. And this isn't just like a don't get drunk, drive sober type thing. You should
Right.
not drive drunk, obviously, but disclaimer, right? Um, like if we're just honest about what you're doing, it's literally putting poison in your body. And what you feel is your body putting everything else on hold to get that stuff out. So it's like, are you willing to deal with that or not? There's one guy, Bedros Keuilian. He's a pretty high profile entrepreneur. You might have seen some of his stuff. For the listeners, you guys might have seen he came under fire recently for his quote unquote alpha male boot camp, um, which people have very divisive opinions about. But he has a very good episode on his podcast. I think it's just called the Bedros Keuilian Show, and he breaks down why he hasn't touched alcohol in years. Um, and he describes specifically like what what happens with it. He actually mentioned some of the epigenetic factors like we were talking about earlier. So if you have certain predispositions, it can lead to liver failure, cancers, all sorts of stuff. And so it's like, is that a risk you're willing to tolerate? For someone like me, I'm 22. I think it's less important than for people that are getting on because your body processes it better early on. Um, but it's also the type of thing where it's like I don't really have much of an inclination um uh to drink a lot because I think, like you were saying earlier, I don't want to be coping with existence. Like if there's a problem, I want to feel the full brunt of that problem so that I have the impetus to make a change and move past that. So I think that's my position on, anything you're putting in your body, whether it's information or food or anything else, is just knowing exactly what you're consuming and then making a prudential judgment of, am I willing to tolerate the effects of this in my life or not?
Love it. Well said.
Thank you. Um, but yeah, so one thing that you mentioned right there with the beer, you said it was not good for you specifically. One of the things you mentioned in one of your posts, you said was a mistake you made in kind of, getting things started. You said, quote, restricting whole food groups like dairy and fruit because I couldn't digest them well and labeling them bad. So my question is, what are the like absolute principles that you think people should live by regardless of who they are? And then where is it more important to consider like, genetics and what they like and their personal preferences and things like that?
Hmm. So for every human being, of everything I've ever learned, is your prerogative to nourish your life as best you can. So that is a principle for everybody. And when I say nourish, I'm talking about every single area of your life, whether it's your prayer life, your thought life, your relationships, the
Hmm.
food and drink that you take in, the things you put on your skin, how you show up in the world. It's everything is under the umbrella of nourishing. And that
Hmm.
will literally, that principle alone can literally change someone's life. If they just sat down and wrote down all the ways that to them they could nourish their life, which is typically things that give them joy,
Hmm.
and a good blueprint for probably why they're here and how they tick, right? So in nourishment, obviously most people's heads go straight to nutrition. And for me, though, I will say this with the caveat, I did need a nice baseline because I wasn't digesting things well.
Mm.
This is where you do see the things like autoimmune protocol, the GAPS diet. The autoimmune protocol is a diet, by the way. The paleo, all these things, they
Hmm.
were just stepping stones for me, and I could probably go through. I could literally tell you every year, oh, I was on this diet this year, then I went to keto, then I went to this. But dude, every single time I moved from diet to diet, which people will call yo-yo dieting, um, I took steps backwards, right,
Yep.
as I was fumbling forward. And I kept thinking when I'd feel good that I'd found the panacea, that I'd found the way
Mm.
to.
Hmm.
And I think for any human that thinks they've found like the way through diet, through especially through restriction, like spoiler alert, you haven't found the way. It's just maybe it's working in terms of maybe you're losing weight, maybe you're getting some of your short-term outcomes, and that's great. That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear. I mean, small victories are huge. You want to stack those. But what I found was when we stay there in a place of restriction, um, again, there could be a nice baseline and a nice place as a reset for that. But
Hmm.
if you stay there, you're going to start to hinder your ability to heal and to grow as a human
Mm.
being because you're not including all of the bounty of things that were, I believe, given to us in nature by God for us to heal. And everybody's different too. So back
Hmm.
to genetics. I do believe look where you live and really try to eat more locally and seasonally versus supporting globalization.
Hmm.
But and there's many reasons for that. But B, even your genetics, what kind of society you come from, how much melanin is in your skin, where your ancestors are from, because those give you really good clues into how your ancestors ate and literally how you got here. I
Hmm.
mean, truly, again, biologically speaking, you have so many great great grandparents, and they were obviously able to produce you at some point through your parents. So
Hmm.
those are some of the overarching themes that are, I believe, wise to be honest with in your life.
Hmm.
Um, so that's more of again a nutritional aspect or point of view. But this nourishment is what changed the game for me because once I was able to, I will just use the word evolve or grow out of
Hmm.
this place of restriction, dude, my healing in my body and my mentality, it just skyrocketed from there. And I realized that the gurus were telling me to stay in these types of diets, and I was buying their protocols. And there's nothing wrong with the protocol, but if you don't grow, if you don't graduate from the protocol, you'll always be in the protocol.
Hmm.
That's the part where maybe in the fine print or maybe in the large print, people need to talk about like, hey, you're not like when I work with people, I am just momentary. I am a mirror for people. I
Hmm.
listen and I am just there temporarily. And I come in to set the tempo. And I think in a way, almost like bring about this healing frequency, this approach for people's lives to where all they have to do is show up as themselves and match that. But they've got to do the work,
Hmm.
right? And then they grow. But I'm not doing my job if I'm there for years and years. Like I want to be their last
Yeah.
visit. I had a doctor recently, Cassie Huckabee, on her website. She says, sign up for your, how does she say this? Your first, let's see, I'm sorry, your last first appointment in the doctor's office, or it's something like that.
Mm.
Like, I have never heard a doctor say that, but that is it. Like,
Hmm.
that's the point, is to get people from point A to point B and then go serve the world. So tangent there, sorry, but
No, no, that's good. Good stuff.
hopefully that makes sense. This nourishment, this
Yeah.
includes restriction. There is a place for restrictions sometimes, but you can't stay there. You got to grow and evolve. If you're not growing and evolving, what you're doing is not working.
Hmm. Yeah, and that, just generally speaking, that principle of growth, I think, is a lot more impactful than um trying to avoid things, because it's almost like approaching it from scarcity versus abundance.
Yes.
Because with the one, you're just trying to hide from the one thing, and inevitably you're letting it chase you down. But
Yes.
then if you're going after something you want, that thing might pop up from time to time, and it's not a huge deal because it's like, oh, like this is just a phase. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to keep moving forward. And so it's really interesting that you'd say that. So you've spoken a lot about, energy. You said frequency a couple times, things like that. And it's very interesting to me how much scientific understanding we have of the world, but how that almost need to really quantify and measure everything gives us a very physical focus, and we don't think about matters of the soul or the intellect very much at all.
Right.
But it's undeniable that the physical world has an effect on your mental state. I mean, we started out talking about how you had a physical problem that
Mhm.
you said, and I wrote this down. The biggest problem is people feel behind in life, which is
Mhm.
not a physical thing. It's not oh, like fatigue, like you're tired. It's not achiness, soreness. It's something that's completely spiritual. You can't go to a doctor's office and say, "Oh, doctor, I feel behind in life," and they're like, "Oh, pop this pill. This will make you feel better." Now, if it's like a sedative or antidepressant or something, maybe, but that's not a physical effect. You can't point to that feeling and say, "Oh, like I feel down in my hand."
Right.
So with the interaction of kind of energy and the physical world, um I guess my first question is um how much of energy do you think is internal versus external? And I've also seen you in post describe it as a body charge. So can you explain like what you mean by those terms?
Absolutely. Something we're not taught in school is that we are electrical beings in nature, again, designed by God, and that, like plants, and this is all based on science. If you want to go look this up for
Hmm.
people that are like, what are you talking about? We literally have little batteries inside of us, our cells. And this is more so how the mitochondria actually work. I know we all learned about the mitochondria in school, but through processes like creating ATP, gathering full spectrum light,
Hmm.
speaking of frequencies, just touching the earth, which the earth has a charge, you can measure it. Human
Hmm.
beings have a charge. Um,
And for
and
for anybody that thinks this is crazy, when I was really little, one of the weirdest things I would do with my dad's just like toolbox that I thought was the coolest thing ever. So he had one of those little plastic testers that you can, push to a wire, and it
yeah,
lights up a little light if it's on. You put that sucker on your arm, it's going to light up for a couple minutes. So this is like your body physically has a charge. This isn't some woo-woo stuff. This is something you can demonstrate for yourself with $5, $10 at Home Depot. So
yes.
yeah.
And then you start thinking about all those little batteries are actually all succinct and hooked up. Like,
Hmm.
how did that happen? Are you kidding me? You're not one battery, you're billions of little batteries all working in this very second together to help you tick, to help you do all the things that you do,
Hmm.
right? And they all have little jobs. So, just on a very general basis, one of the ways to understand this is, how you feel when you go outside. Why does everyone say, "Ah, go outside, just go outside. It's good for you." Like, why? Um, we now know that the sunlight literally charges us up. The
Hmm.
sun rays, in a sense, have information for our bodies to collect. And in fact, the inputs from full spectrum light, not from our light bulbs, but from this just the sun, just that one very large light in the sky, calibrate our bodies and help us know, for instance, when to start, revving down for sleep or when
Hmm.
to rev up for waking up. And so it's no secret that in a society that has so many street lights, car lights, cell phone screen lights, we see all of this mental health crises and overweight people. And I think it's natural to talk about the food, but the part that we're not that we're not probably in, at least in the past, it's happening more, but the part we're not talking about enough is the electrical components of
Mm,
human beings, and even this charge, this frequency that, again, I think a lot of times gets pushed as woo woo or whatever, but
mm-hmm,
really it's not, it's happening. You can't see it. I think that's why people maybe grapple with this idea of this frequency. But to
mm-hmm,
me, my biggest aha moment with that was when they measure the Earth's frequency, which is called the Schumann's resonance, and when they measure a human's frequency, they are literally they're nearly, if not the same exact measurement. And then
mm,
you start to talk about, where do humans come from? Well, if the Bible talks about man coming literally from the earth,
mm-hmm.
the ground, made by God, oh my gosh, we have the same frequency. It kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
to me, I'm not from some outer, I don't know what people call it, stardust or whatever. Like, I come from, and we go back to the earth. It's such a, to me, a biblical perspective of how this all started with the word and water and charge and frequency. It's all in
Mm-hmm.
Genesis. You probably don't talk about it much from the pulpit, but as you start to think about this, as I ruminate on how I get my clients healthy, it's, hey,
Yeah.
are you near a body of water? You need to go out in that. There's a lot of charge in that water. There's a lot of negative ions, which again, they can measure. Negative ions are what actually um, they aid in our respiratory processes, our energy production. Like, negative
Mm-hmm.
ions are huge. The opposite would be positive ions, which you think would be like a good thing, positive, but they're actually not. Positive ions are created by furniture, screens, chemicals. Airplane is probably the epitome of a positive ion generator. You're in
Mm.
a metal tube,
Way up
35,000
in the
feet.
sky. Yeah.
Yep, off the earth. You're not touching the ground. You're not grounded. Um, so that's just, and again, another, I'm so many different things I'd love to touch on this.
Yeah.
I need to just like probably record this and get it out to the world. But back to your just original question, which was so beautiful. It's like, yes, we are electrical and magnetic in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we realize that and actually play into that and like be that, the healthier and the better we feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how much of it do you think is how much is like a mind game or how you're holding yourself?
Hmm.
Or actually, before we even get into that, can you also just define what you believe energy is?
Mm.
Like if I were to describe it, and obviously this is a little bit unfair because I had some time to think about this beforehand. But I believe that energy essentially, if we're talking physical energy, spiritual energy, just categorically, it's the ability in a specific moment in time to affect change. So
Mm.
high energy people, it's not just like describing a vibe or something. The high energy
Right.
people are moving around, they're looking forward, they're getting good ideas, they have this
Yeah.
fire for life. And then people that are low energy don't. They're stagnant, they're slow, they're timid and cautious. Um, but what do you think energy really is in the first place?
Gosh, yeah. To me, like, when you see energy, emotion, and when you experience, energy, it's it's potential actualized.
Hmm.
And I think it was Einstein that did the E equals MC squared, which, his whole thesis was that energy equals matter, and
Mm,
real, it's a real thing.
hmm.
It's not just, it's not nothing. But yes, energy to me is again just this potential actualized that um obviously allows us to experience um, the world around us. It's, to me, the difference between living on paper or in a vacuum,
Hmm.
which is a lot of where a lot of the Western medicine kind of comes from. These theories of, well, if you have this problem, it's all written down, right? If you have this problem, take this pill or
Mm,
this. It's like, well, yeah, in theory that would work, but we live in the world where there's moving energy and matter, and there's different principles at play. We don't live in a vacuum in space. We don't live on paper. We don't live in this study. You know what I
hmm.
mean? Like, there's a
Don't live
lot of
in
different,
a lab environment.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
so well. That's it. we don't live, well, we do now, but we should be living under the fluorescent lights of like a
Touche.
lab,
Yep.
think of an office building or something. So yes, again, eh, energy is just, it's so important. I think we all want it to, like, we all want like physical,
Hmm.
mental capacity and energy as humans. And so to me, it's no secret that like the opposite of potential actualized is potential lost or potential not moved on,
Hmm.
or which to me are these energy sucks. I call them energy leaks, drains in life that when left unmitigated and not dealt with really do compromise our potential, and
Hmm.
they stagnate and decay the human beings experience and ability to live more so in mission and purpose.
Hmm.
So this energy and life force, this vitality, really can be the propulsion if you set your life up and step into a life that allows for the energy to flow
Hmm.
and to be set in motion, and to rest paradoxically too. Have to turn it off, in darkness, 68 degrees, and natural material sheets. Like there's such a nice, beautiful, life is so full of paradox.
Hmm.
We have to turn off to, do the opposite, turn on and go out in life with gusto. So yeah, energy is important, and
Definitely.
thank God for energy.
Yeah, no kidding. And then, so with respect to priming your surroundings, your relationships, the things that you're letting into your life, how, I guess, how do you specifically, and how would you recommend, the listeners in general, set up their life so that they're getting those best inputs and they're getting something that's, opening the floodgates so to reinforce and expand that energy?
Mm. It's about returning to original design
Mm.
first and foremost. So how are you made? Um, Getting back into nature, natural inputs, being a being an original design human being,
Hmm.
and really seeing where in your life are there shortcuts and fabrications, and where can you get back to this sense and this being of living in original design. I
Hmm.
mean, let's go back to Genesis and see, we obviously don't live in the Garden of Eden, but we know that people lived closer to the land. They were much more, I'd say, in harmony with their surroundings, and that could also look like, you know, uh, taking out a forest if you need to. Like it's not that you don't like ever, you know, tear a tree down or do what you need to do in your life or in nature. It's this knowing that we're human beings. We are here to populate the earth. We're here to be out in nature and to help nature thrive. And there are certain principles where you take away to bring back. It's again, it's like this you're not lowering yourself to an earthworm and just, kind of allowing things to happen around you. It's you're interacting with nature as a human, knowing who you are,
Hmm.
knowing why you were made to be here. We're so smart intellectual beings, and yet we've also outpaced ourselves, I think, and overthought, oh, we could live a certain way and at this pace. So
Mm.
it's just again about getting back to nature, and which is your original nature. And then
Hmm.
the other part I want to say real quick is that getting radically honest with yourself. Like I just mentioned, the general human being ways that will help you return
Hmm.
and vitality. But then let's talk about you as a person, you as an N equals one. You're the only one around, that's ever been in existence. You are a unique individual. And so getting radically honest with yourself for every listener and writing down, taking the time, turning off your devices. Uh, I would say recommended, get in nature to do this and write down what fires you up,
Hmm.
and you don't have to nail it your first try, but just start free flowing, brainstorm, get in that flow state again, almost as a kid of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, what do you want to do?
Hmm.
Why are you here? And then I call those gains. And so as you write these things down, these turn ons, there typically is a blueprint right there in front of you of why you're here. And so if you're able to connect the dots, which takes radical honesty with yourself and ruthless elimination of the things that are sucking
Mm,
you out of your life,
mhm,
you can move more into those life-giving things that give you joy. And from there, man, that's the, as everyone's looking for, the winning lottery ticket. Because from there you can be, you can do, you can, maybe you monetize from there if that's a business opportunity. Maybe it's not, it doesn't have to be,
mhm.
but that's where people really come back online, if you will. And we see a lot of integration and synchronicities and different areas of your life starting to connect again versus kind of this robotic, compartmentalized, like I've got my job, then I go to church, and then I'm this person for this group, and then,
Mm, mhm.
oh, then I'm a dad. Like, to me, this is where like holistic health comes in, because people want to say, I don't know what that means. It's like, well, if you're a human being, you're holistic, and as in you're not a robot
Yeah.
compartmentalized. Everything affects everything. We know that. It's how it's all set up. It's intricately woven. So the sooner we get on board with that, the sooner we can thrive, and the sooner we can,
Mhm.
move forward in life, heal, and step into our true mission and purpose on earth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. Very natural question comes from that though. So,
Sure.
you're talking about a very natural, return to our roots and things like that. You've also mentioned God, the Bible, Christianity a few times. Um, One of the core beliefs that we have is that, our nature by itself is not enough, that there is something higher to strive for, and there is a supernatural calling. And I was actually just rereading some snippets from C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man. Are you
Yeah.
familiar with it? Yeah, beautiful
I
book.
read it. I'm familiar.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so for the listeners, by the way, I highly recommend reading this if you're interested. It's um, about 100 pages long, and it's very interesting because he's writing about this um, almost modern destruction of the human person. And he wrote this in, I think, the 60s or something. And a lot of the things that he talked about have now come to fruition, and some of the things he wrote about have not happened yet. And so it's very interesting to see this, from the past, a very prophetic perspective of the way that, humans and their relation with the world is trending. Um, but anyway, so one of the things that he points out here is that um, living based purely on instinct is not a feasible way to live life. Actually, I'll just read this passage here real quick. He says, quote, "Our instincts are at war. If it is held that the instinct for preserving the species should always be obeyed at the expense of other instincts, whence do we derive this rule of precedence? To listen to the instinct speaking in its own cause and deciding in its own favor would be rather simple-minded. Each instinct, if you listen to it, will claim to be gratified at the expense of all the rest. But the very act of listening to one rather than to the others, we have already prejudged the case. If we did not bring the examination of our instincts to a knowledge of their comparative dignity, we cannot and could never learn from them. And that knowledge cannot itself cannot be instinctive. The judge cannot be one of the parties judged, or if he is, the decision is worthless, and there is no ground for placing the preservation of the species above self-preservation or sexual appetite. Um, so the idea being, you still need some sort of value framework to say, these are the instincts that I should follow. And obviously, with questions like, what do you want to do with your life? We expect people to answer that at 18 when that's, literally the work of an entire lifetime to figure out what the answer to that is. Um,
Right.
but so what I'm getting at with this is like, how would you discern between what is um I guess how do you find out what is truly your intuition? If we go back to what you were talking about earlier, and what is stuff that we could say is of the lower self, more short term, feels good in the moment, but it's not ultimately in your best interest.
Great question. So I think if we're not in relationship with God, uh, if
Hmm.
we aren't rooted in Him, and for me, that's Jesus, that's God.
Hmm.
And I was raised that way, although I had to come to grips with like what I truly believed, and we all, I think we all have our own journey there.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say left to our own instincts and not rooted in Him, I mean, good luck. I mean, you may make some good decisions for sure, but I believe there has
Read
to
a
be,
history book. Yeah.
yeah, right, exactly. There has to be surrender to
Hmm.
me personally. And this is just my opinion, but especially as a father figure and a leader, um, it's not all about me and my instinct and my intuition. And I believe because I have a cultivated relationship with the Father, that I now trust when I am prompted by something. And yes, I
Hmm.
have to slow down sometimes, but that to me is where my quiet time and like my prayer life comes in. And
Hmm.
I'm not perfect at all, but I believe there is an intersection there. There is something happening when the more and more we interact and we pray. And this is going to look different for a lot of people, I
Hmm.
believe. We all we're just different. We're all different in nature. But in terms of um I think how either we get quiet or how we listen or how we even read, whatever that is, there may be different inputs involved, but just from my point of view, it's I have a relationship with God, so it's just knowing and having a confidence in that,
Hmm.
obviously. And then again, just really for me is trying to slow down when I need to, of really listening. Um,
Hmm.
and I am in right standing. I feel that confidence as a son. So I'm not ashamed anymore. I don't see myself. I know that you can cherry pick and talk about how lowly of a sinner we all are. And that's true in context.
Hmm.
Because I know my right standing and I have, gosh, I'm so thankful I have a prayer life now, and I do my best
Yeah.
to write things down that I'm like going through, that because I do, like, I'll struggle with, like, certain themes, or like, I don't understand this. I don't understand why this happens in life, and I
Hmm.
don't ever pretend to have all the answers. And so I know in this day and age, I'm trying to do a better job of being, as I said earlier, radically honest
Hmm.
with the things I'm grappling with. And that's where I think people like C.S. Lewis and some of these theologians and like these writers do a really good job, is because they help us give like perspective, even if
Hmm.
they live in a different time period. But I think your question's so valid and good, because I think maybe people would have different answers, but it
Hmm.
does get back to like how do you know what you're hearing, or how do you know if your intuition is correct, or, and then I guess my answer is that it's this cultivation of just knowing the truth and just really
Hmm.
just showing up and just doing my best, and knowing I'm not gonna be the perfect father or the perfect role model, but trying to set myself up and shooting for a high standard of
Hmm.
what I know I can step into, and really doing my best, and also admitting when I'm wrong. And that's
Hmm.
that's been a process for my wife and I, of apologizing to our kids, apologizing to each other. I didn't used to
Hmm.
do that. I don't come from a family that does that either. So
Mm.
that humility, I think, has been
Hmm.
it's been life-giving for us. So I don't know if that any of that made sense, but
Yeah, no, that's
really
awesome.
good question.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's kind of what you were saying earlier too about a lot of the more fundamental things in life are paradoxical. Like
Yes.
needing to almost surrender to that and kind of give yourself up in order to really find yourself, and not in like a cliche sense, but to figure out like genuinely who you are and what you want. I mean, yeah, I don't know why God loves operating in paradoxes as much as he does, but if we think about it, like the symbol of Christianity is the worst defeat in history. It is the torture device upon which our God was murdered.
Right.
And then God goes and says, "Oh no, I've been defeated." No,
Right.
no, I'm not. And
Right.
turns it into the greatest victory of all time. So it's like,
Right.
you know, I don't know what to make of that, but I think, well, now that I'm thinking it through, maybe the whole thing is one big exercise in humility, in really recognizing how little we can comprehend of
Dude.
the grand plan for things, even though, we might be wise in our own estimation.
Yes. Yes. The more I said this the other day to somebody, because I was like at that point, the
Hmm.
more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know, and I'm sure you feel
Yep.
the same way. I would, maybe I'm speaking for you, but the more I try to collect, the more I think I realize God
Hmm.
doesn't want me to know everything because I probably frankly couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
I know I could if I knew every secret to the world and every happening and everything in history. There's no way. There's no way I could handle it. And there's something to that. So there's certainly a posture of just okay. Well, then what do I do with that? It's just showing up every day. You know,
Hmm.
as the best version, using all the tools you've been given,
Hmm.
and sure, collect more tools for the tool belt. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's why that's a beauty. That's a beautiful part of life. Especially as a
Hmm.
man, for some reason, there's something about viscerally learning how to do things with your hands and learning history and all of these things and making meaning of like what that's the human experience obviously.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, you're not going to be perfect, and it's I guess just I'm grappling with it right now, but just
Hmm.
showing up the best you can in humility, and like I was mentioning, telling my wife when I'm wrong and realizing like, wow, like I'm so thankful for you that I have you in my life. You're such a balance for me and you have so much wisdom that I don't have. Like I have to remember
Hmm.
that and in the ways that, she is made versus I am made as a man. And I'm like, God, I'm so glad that you're the mother. I couldn't mother these kids. There's no way. Like I biologically and mentally couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
So I'll never be able to do that.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I
So,
digress.
so to tie that back to energy, can you delve a little bit into how you view masculine energy, feminine energy, and the interaction between the two? Because this is something, I've been thinking a lot about the past, mm, 1, 2 years, I'd say. But I'm curious from your perspective, with your understanding of energy and how much it impacts life, and then also not only being in a relationship, but being in a committed marriage with,
Yep.
children, right?
Right.
What does that look like?
So first of all, we should make the distinction that testosterone is not the male hormone and estrogen is not the female hormone. Why? Because you and I have both. Okay,
Hmm.
so we know that. And I'm not like 20% female. So like let's just
That's
throw that out there.
not very Pride Month of you, but okay.
That's right. No, no, yeah, you better edit that out. Um, so so with that being said, well then we can start to think, okay, all right, so I'm not 100% masculine energy, as in there's going to be some weave and flow.
Hmm.
And this is more where semantics come in. But typically speaking, the feminine energies are the creative energies. And as you could imagine, the more, how do you say, soft, flowy, these nurturing, right?
Hmm.
Whereas masculine is the frame holding energies and the you could go ahead and say strength, and I'm not going to put the best words. Other people could speak better to me than I
Hmm.
can. But when we moved to Maui, we actually learned about this in this sort of family ecology mentorship we did about
Hmm.
family structure. And it was so helpful for me because I had never learned about what it means to hold a frame for a family. And the cool thing is at the same time, and as we learned, in fully functioning marriages and families, the husband and wife are able to flow in and out of the frame holding. And it makes sense because in some cases, let's say motherhood, the female is going to actually hold the frame there. And the
Hmm.
male is going to kind of seamlessly work and flow through that where he can, right?
Hmm.
And I would say even more so, and it's easier for me to say, the same applies for like in our case provision, for job, for just overall I call it like frame holding strength for my family. Like in order for us to really work, and I know this, and even like speaking to energetics and our moods and stuff and how we're doing, if I'm not holding the frame for my family, if I'm not holding the structure where my wife can seamlessly weave and flow throughout the day
Hmm.
with motherhood, with feeding the kids, with whatever it is. And she does help me with business and stuff. She's fantastic. I met her in real estate. She's such a good,
Mm.
potent, um, powerhouse with when she touches business as well. So we naturally already were flowing because we literally were actually in business together when we first started dating. It was like kind of crazy how it all started. So that was cool. And I already had like a grid work for that.
Hmm.
But that is where you see these kind of energies weaving and flowing. And it's much easier to see it, I think, when you're parents and you are the dad, the mom, and with the kids. Those
Hmm.
roles obviously are highlighted more. So that's, I think, a framework and an overarching like themes for the masculine and
Hmm.
feminine energies, you know. But the big aha for me was that like I was always told in surveys and when bosses would give me feedback, they always would say, you, Colin, are really good with your soft skills. And dude, I hated hearing that. I didn't want to admit. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I don't want to be good at soft skills, you know? And once I gave that time and I actually finally asked for explanation, they said, oh, you are fantastic with the way you actually hold space for people, the way your customer service,
Hmm.
metrics are, your sales, it's really more qualitative. It's the feely stuff. Like, and so that was that's how I'm wired. And I'm maybe more of a people person. I can feel, once again, semantics, but I could kind of feel energies. I can kind of heat map a room and know,
Hmm.
ooh, this guy's kind of off or this guy's angry. That's just how I'm wired. I'm just very sensitive in that way. So, again, just giving more color to these
Hmm.
energies, masculine, feminine. Does some of that make sense where I'm
Yeah.
headed with?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting frame for all of it. I guess that's a funny use of the word since we're talking about frames so much.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, the entire concept is just fascinating to me because of, the interaction between the two and the idea that, you know, women can step into um not masculine roles, but like masculine traits, and
Yep.
men can step into feminine traits without actually compromising the integrity of the role that they fill. Because like
Yeah.
even if you're like, very intently listening to one of your kids or whatever, that doesn't mean you're not filling your role as a father. It's just, yeah, it's a different expression of it. And I think it's
Yes.
just sitting with that is very interesting internally because
Hmm.
it's almost uncomfortable. Like
Hmm.
I'd assume like, I'd assume there aren't too many women listening to this, but for all the guys, you probably have a gut reaction of like, I don't have any feminine energy. That's bullshit. Like,
Exactly.
but if you sit with it, it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, ultimately, it sounds like what it comes down to is that that's more a label or a categorization that you're giving to this overarching principle, and it's not like having these things or not having them is going to make you masculine or feminine all by itself.
Exactly. 100%. That's so well said. It's really more human categorical analysis or
Hmm.
giving it a name, if you will, to like the way you show up or how you're to use it again, holding the frame, but right, how you're responding. That's exactly right.
Hmm. Yeah, awesome. Well, I know we've been going for quite a while here. So to wrap things up, I have just a couple final questions for you.
Yeah.
Um, so you can be as extensive or as brief with this as you like, but I want to hear a little bit more about the move to Hawaii and why you decided to transplant your life so far across the world and what that effect has had on you physically, energetically, relationally, so on.
Absolutely. It's been a huge learning curve, as you could imagine. I mean, it's
Hmm.
everything changes when you leave what you and I know of as mainland United States living, and especially with a family. And
Yeah.
like we sold everything. I mean, we really did. We didn't have to, but we felt this prompting to. And I'll back up by saying that I was literally, I think I've made a couple posts about this, but I was deep diving Hawaii. This is post 2020 when things had kind of slowed down in the world.
Hmm.
I was working more so from home and real estate, and I just had this like affinity for Hawaii, all things Hawaii, and I couldn't really explain it other than like I had a background in living by the coast. I lived in Los Angeles as a kid, so I loved the beach. I
Hmm.
loved that just that lifestyle. Those were, as I always tell my friends and family, those are to me the golden years of my childhood, and had a fantastic upbringing then in Memphis, Tennessee, in the Delta South. I assimilated. I actually, in fact, we just went back a few weeks ago. I loved Memphis and my suburb there, but like I mean, talk about polar opposites. I mean, West Coast, Southern California, and the Delta South. I mean, very, very different. So there was this, I think, returning to these lifestyle principles of vitality and
Mm,
of I'm learning about negative ions. I'm learning about what latitude you live at and sunlight and grounding. And so I'm looking at, well, who lives that way? And it's no secret that, you live on an island, you're going to be more associated with those things if
hmm.
you want to. I mean, it's easier to. I think everyone thinks of just that classic, Hawaii beach hut life. And so there's certainly some some rose-colored lens to that, but we had this opportunity come up and my wife said yes to it. It was this mentorship where I'll be brief with it, but this woman, she was a dentist, orthodontist, and she started doing lip ties and tongue ties and specializing in that with kids. If
Oh, interesting.
people aren't familiar with that, yeah, I didn't know about this before then, but we all have them to an extent. But the lip tie is your frenum, which is that piece of, sorry, I look like a donkey right now here on video, but that skin flap right there, and then of course a tongue tie is that
Hmm.
uh, that almost like meridian, that midline of tissue underneath your
Hmm.
tongue. And when kids have it significantly, and we're seeing this more and more, which there's got to be some underlying reasons, and there are for that. They snip them, they laser them because kids can't either talk right, they can't eat. A lot of times it's they can't latch. So you're talking about like newborn
Interesting.
babies that literally
Yeah.
can't feed, and they've got to snip them, or they got to do something. So what
Wow.
happened? So initial success came from the snipping, the lasering, all that, right? Well, then they started finding kids were literally collapsing at their midline. So essentially just draw a line from your head straight to, I guess, the bottom of your abdomen,
Hmm.
down there. Um, that's your meridian, and the tongue we know is intricately connected to your kind of the middle of your body.
Hmm.
I don't pretend to be some expert there, but what was happening was kids skulls, kids heads were falling. Like, I don't mean like their bones were falling in, but they were starting to collapse in certain areas.
Like
They weren't
posture wise, like just,
exactly
yeah.
posture wise. And then they had real problems, right? So you go
Mm.
from not watching or talking right to like you're not walking
And
right, stuff
you're
like
saying this is like over the course of years that this problem builds up.
it can be
Wow.
right. So,
Okay.
yeah, if it's a newborn, it's you're going to have newborn issues, but it's a little bit different than say a 7-year-old
Hmm.
who, you know, and their ramifications would be different. Anyways, so what she started doing was treating these kids fascially. So no snipping, no lasering. We're talking fascially being in the fascia, which we all have. It's a system of tissue that is
Hmm.
connected across our body. It's more towards the surface than say our bones are, our muscles, but it's there, and especially cranial fascial, which is the head. And so, dude, she started correcting these things just by working on the fascia, and especially cranial fascial therapy, as they
Oh,
now call it,
interesting.
CFT. So my wife gets uh, um, licensed in CFT, cranial fascial therapy. And during that time, she was talking to this person she had heard on a podcast. She's like, and she got lit up. It was one of those moments in life where my wife was just like on fire. Like, I'm supposed to learn this. And we're
Hmm.
realtors by trade. Like, this is so in left field, I think, for our
Yeah.
friends and family. But again, as a move towards strategy of vitality, health, family ecology, really having the most vital family possible. My wife's like, I just need to know this for my kids, for my community. So, dude, so here I am, just praying and watching and just enamored by like Hawaiian stuff, surfers, and again, kind of remembering how I used to live, and then mixed with my wife's opportunity. So we say
Hmm.
we say yes. So we go from Columbus, Ohio realtors to selling everything, including our car, to our best friends and moving to Hawaii. And our family's like, y'all are crazy. Like, what are you doing? But the commitment was 6 to 9 months. We didn't have to move, but we're like, if we're really going to commit to this, let's just go out there.
Hmm.
And we knew like, okay, if it's supposed to happen, we know it'll happen. It'll feel pretty frictionless, and God will open doors. If not, it's just we'll just stay here. No harm, no foul. And sure enough, first house we checked on, uh, it was like, oh my gosh, she's like, yeah, my neighbor's moving out the same month you guys want to come. So it's yours if you want it. And rent was through the roof. Rent was absolutely through the roof, but like, you know what? Let's do it. So we spent over a year there instead of 6 to 9 months, which was not a secret to me. I knew
Mm-hmm.
that we'd probably spend time. I thought maybe we'd stay there. And amazing experience, a lot of expansion happening with being outside, of course, in nature, barefoot. The way we're raising our kids, looked a little different than what you're used to here, but
Mm-hmm.
overall, you see it more out there. And I learned a lot about the Hawaiian culture and the societal constructs out there and kind of the generational stuff going on out there, and really had a heart. I noticed that my heart had already been cultivated to really like serve those people and like, just learn more about what they were going through. A lot of people that feel stuck, I think, out there, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So many things I could say about it, but we stayed. And then of course we come back to Ohio for the summer, last summer, a year ago, and we had just gotten our real estate licenses out there. So we are going to start doing real estate. We'd finished our program. My wife had learned so much. Our kids their mouths were expanding from some of the CFT and
Mm-hmm.
vital lifestyle inputs. And dude, then the Maui fires happened in August, which are you
Mm.
familiar with the Maui fires?
Very, yeah.
Okay. I feel like the world knows at this point. It was extremely hard. A, that it happened. B, that we moved once while we were there, and we were
Mm-hmm.
going to switch houses with some friends, and they were in Lahaina, which burnt down.
Oh man.
And so we saw the remnants of that house. I mean, gone.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was like a dry washer or dryer that was like kind of standing, and the whole house was gone. So that hit my wife really hard, and of like,
Wow.
what would we have done that day? Would we have, who knows? We had to kind of stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
um Mixed with
Yeah.
us
That.
being, and we couldn't help people there. We
Mm-hmm.
knew people involved, we knew people that were affected by it, so we just paused, man. We just stopped, and we had just gotten our, like I said, our real estate licenses, and so we have made a pretty grand pivot. Decided not to go back out there.
Mm.
We had a rental. We started subleasing it to people that so we weren't on the west side. We were up in the beautiful parts of upcountry. So
Yeah.
you can still go. We did go back in October and visit and then see some friends on Oahu, but overall just an incredibly expansive experience that was good for us, and I think has helped
Mm-hmm.
us know more of what we want, which is we'll always have an anchor and a base here in Ohio. That's been made clear.
Mm-hmm.
But we're supposed to, at least for our family, go out and learn these principles of vitality and health and then bring them back to
Mm-hmm.
our community and to the people we love. And I think online too, and because now we have this tool to get the word out to people of here's these modalities we're learning. Here's ways you can expand your child's palate. Here's ways the husband and wife can kind of flow into your roles and show up as your best father or mother. So yeah, Hawaii was super expansive. We love it out there. We have dear friends, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually a part of, and I'll let you talk, but I'm a part of this group called the Radical Collective, and one of the guys is still out in Maui, but because of the program we did, it's actually five. I think we're all dads now. Five guys that have each done this family ecology program with their spouse. And now that we have been kind of fired up to go serve the world, we've created this collective of guys to
Mm.
help men with whatever they're facing. Like one guy does pornography addiction. I am much more bent towards vitality and health and autoimmunity and symptoms. One guy, the head, is a project manager who is in the movement world and
Mm-hmm.
space, how to move your body as medicine. One guy is really into like men's coaching. So it's just been cool, the doors that have opened because we said yes to this really, like, I don't know how it's going to go. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just go check it out. And so if that can encourage anybody, if there's things that you're a little bit scared about that maybe you feel a yes towards but you're avoiding, like, you know, move towards is always a better strategy than move away, or take it as far as it'll go until the door gets shut, because then
Mm-hmm.
it's not, maybe for now. So man, Maui, great
Yeah.
great experience, man.
That's powerful. Yeah. And that answered my next question because I was going to ask what you would say to somebody that wants to or has to take a leap of faith. And
Oh,
you said it perfectly right there. Go all in and you're going to hit that wall if it's not meant to work out. So
that's it. That simple. Yeah.
awesome, brother. Well, I've really appreciated our time together. This has been a super powerful conversation. So you've got your page on Instagram, you do coaching. Is there any other projects? Obviously the collective, basically where can people find you? Where can they see more of your work?
Totally. Yeah. So Instagram is probably the hub. I'm also on, Twitter or X, but
Mhm.
same thing. It's Colin Skinner. Um, the Radical Collective will be firing up here soon. We already are intaking men, essentially seeing where they're at and if it's a good fit. So that's pretty cool. We started to set it up, and guys were literally knocking on our door saying, I want what you have. How can I learn from you? How can I get in community with you guys? So we'll have a Discord set up, I believe, for men to learn that way. We'll do one-on-ones with them.
Mhm.
Uh, so that's the Radical Collective. And there is officially an Instagram page if you want to go find the Radical Collective. It just started. And I can plug that, in with you. And then, yes,
Yeah,
I do.
definitely.
Yeah, man. And I do one-on-one work with people, phone calls. I work with people in what I call containers, safe places to grow and to learn and to witness, observe, how can we move more into mission and purpose and heal. So it's my life's work, my calling, I feel like, and I'm just getting started. So I
Yeah.
really hope I can, serve somebody, if not through this call, in person or on a phone call with someone listening, because there's so much more to step into and out, out there in the world, in life, if we're able and willing to, and we're all able to, but if we're willing to answer the call and move more into uncharted territory, especially as a man,
Mhm.
to really find, the temper of our heart and like why we're here. It's just so important. And that is the healing medicine. That's the healing frequency that we all need to step into. So
Mhm. Good stuff, brother. Yeah, well, thank you again so much for coming on, guys. Please go check out his Instagram. He's got a lot of really awesome content, both stylistically and in terms of the actual information that's in it. Um, and yeah, Colin, thank you so much for coming on.
Gabriel, thanks for having me, man. It's great to get to know you better too.
And that concludes episode 17 of the Operation Paragon podcast. You can find Colin on Instagram at Colin__Skinner. And there's a link to the Radical Collective's various resources in the description of this episode. You can check them out if you got value out of this conversation, and to hear more from this show, you can find Operation Paragon on Instagram and YouTube, as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Until next time, remember that greatness is within your reach.